If you took a DNA test tomorrow and it told you that your ancestors were not who you think they are, would you believe it? Or would you throw it away? Because that is exactly the question sitting underneath one of the most quietly explosive arguments in modern genetics. Who is really closest, by blood, to the Albanian people? Not politically, not by flag or border or passport, by blood, by the invisible code sitting inside every cell of your body right now. Is it the Sicilians sitting across the water, carrying the memory of 100 conquerors? Is it the southern Italians, the so-called heel and toe of the boot, who have been called the least Italian of all Italians by their own countrymen? Or is it the Greeks, the people the Albanians have loved, fought, traded with, and been mistaken for 3,000 years? Stay with me for the next 11 minutes because, by the end, you may never look at a map of the Mediterranean the same way again. And you may be forced to ask an uncomfortable question about your own identity, wherever you're from. How much of who I think I am was actually decided by people I've never heard of? This isn't just trivia for genealogy nerds. This question touches nationalism, war, and identity in a part of the world where borders have been redrawn so many times that entire peoples have had to relearn who they were allowed to say they were. For over a century, Albanians have been told a story about themselves, that they are the last living descendants of the ancient Illyrians, an untouched, unbroken bloodline stretching back before Rome, before Greece even had city-states. A people who supposedly stood apart while everyone else around them mixed and blended. But genetics doesn't care about the stories nations tell about themselves. Genetics only cares about what actually happened in bedrooms, on battlefields, and along trade routes generation after generation for thousands of years. And when scientists actually opened up the genome, not the folklore, not the flag, the genome, what they found was stranger, messier, and far more human than any myth. Let's start where every good investigation starts, with the accused. Before Rome ruled the Balkans, the Illyrians did a loose confederation of tribes stretching from modern Slovenia down through Albania. Fierce enough that Rome fought 3 separate wars just to subdue them. Queen Tuta of the Illyrians humiliated Roman envoys and held her own fleets against the Republic before finally falling. When Rome finally absorbed Illyria in 168 BC, it didn't erase the people it administered them. Roads, taxes, garrisons, but the mountain valleys of what is now Albania remained some of the most isolated terrain in the ancient world. And isolation in genetics is destiny. Populations that stay isolated in mountainous refuges tend to retain more of their ancient genetic signature, because fewer outsiders are marrying in. This is the foundation of the modern Albanian national narrative. We are the Illyrians who never left and never fully blended. It's a powerful story. It's also, according to the DNA, only half true. Now cross the water to Sicily, and the story gets loud. Sicily has been Phoenician, Greek, Carthaginian, Roman, Vandal, Byzantine, Arab, Norman, and Spanish, sometimes within the same century. It is arguably the single most genetically layered piece of land in the entire Mediterranean. Here's the twist most people never learn in school. There are Albanian villages in Sicily, not metaphorically literally. In the 15th century, as the Ottoman Empire swallowed the Balkans, tens of thousands of Albanians fled across the Adriatic and settled in southern Italy and Sicily. They're called the Arbëreshë, and towns like Piana degli Albanesi, just outside Palermo, still speak a form of Albanian today, 500 years later. You can walk into a church there and hear a Byzantine Rite liturgy sung in a language most Sicilians can't understand. So when a DNA test says a Sicilian shares unusually high genetic overlap with an Albanian, the headline writes itself, Sicilians and Albanians are secretly the same people. But a good investigator doesn't stop at the headline, because some of that overlap isn't ancient, it's recent. It's 500 years ago recent. It's refugees, not ancestors. Now the Greeks. For most of ancient history, the southern edge of what is now Albania wasn't really Albania at all. It was Epirus, a Greek-speaking region that produced Pyrrhus, the general so dangerous even his victories nearly destroyed him, which is where we get the phrase Pyrrhic victory. For centuries, Illyrian tribes in the south lived right against Greek colonies on the coast, trading, intermarrying, fighting, and occasionally being absorbed. Later, under the Byzantine Empire, huge portions of Albanian territory were administered as Greek-speaking Orthodox Christian land for almost 1,000 years. This matters genetically because, unlike the Sicilian case, which is a sharp, recent injection of Albanian blood into Italy, the Greek-Albanian connection is old, slow, and continuous. Not a single dramatic event, but 2,000 years of neighbors quietly becoming a little bit of each other. Modern genetic studies on Balkan populations consistently place Albanians and Greeks closer together on the genetic map than either group is to most of Western Europe, both carrying a strong Balkan-Aegean ancestral signature that predates the Slavic migrations of the early Middle Ages. Let's get precise because this is where most videos on this topic get lazy. Population genetics doesn't measure closeness with a single number. It uses autosomal DNA clustering, which looks at your whole genome and groups you with populations who share similar patterns, and it uses haplogroups, specific markers passed down almost unchanged through either the paternal or maternal line. On the Y-chromosome side, the direct father-to-son line, Albanian men show a notably high frequency of haplogroup EV13, a lineage strongly associated with the ancient population expansions of the Balkans. Greek men carry E-13 at meaningfully high rates too, especially in mainland and northern Greece. Southern Italians and Sicilians carry it as well, but usually at lower frequencies, diluted by the North African, Levantine, and Iberian input that centuries of Arab and Norman rule brought in. On the broader autosomal whole genome level, multiple peer-reviewed population studies place Albanians and Greeks in overlapping or adjacent genetic clusters within the Balkan-Aegean group, while Sicilians and Southern Italians typically form their own distinct cluster closely related to mainland Italians and to each other, sitting adjacent to, but measurably apart from, the Balkan-Aegean group. Translation. On paper, across the most rigorous population genetic studies available, Greeks tend to sit closer to Albanians than Sicilians or Southern Italians do. But Sicily's Arbëreshë villages are a striking real exception hiding inside the national average. Here's the twist that changes everything. Closest DNA is not one measurement. It depends entirely on which layer of history you're measuring. If you're asking who has the oldest, most continuous shared ancestry, the honest answer, according to the current genetic literature, leans toward the Greeks, because of that long, slow, 2,000-year Balkan-Aegean overlap. If you're asking who has pockets of population that are almost genetically identical to Albanians right now, the answer is the Sicilians, specifically the Arbëreshë communities, because of that 500-year-old direct migration. And if you're asking about Southern Italians as a whole, Calabria, Puglia, Basilicata, the honest answer is that they sit in between, connected to both Greeks and Albanians through the same ancient Magna Graecia colonization that once turned the entire boot of Italy into Greater Greece, but genetically closer overall to the rest of Italy than to the Balkans. So the true answer to the video's title isn't a single name. It's a map with 3 different kinds of closeness on it: geological time, recent migration, and cultural overlap. And almost nobody tells you that distinction because "it depends" doesn't trend as well as shocking DNA results. Walk into Piana degli Albanesi today and you'll find grandmothers who still cook the same dishes their great-great-great-grandmothers carried across the Adriatic in wooden boats, fleeing an empire 5 centuries ago. You'll find church icons painted in a Byzantine style that Rome once viewed with suspicion. You'll find a language that UNESCO now lists as endangered, kept alive in a handful of villages against 500 years of pressure to disappear. That is what population genetics actually measures underneath the charts and the cluster diagrams, not abstractions, but the literal physical descendants of people who ran for their lives and rebuilt a piece of home on foreign shores. The Greek shepherd and Epirus who has never left his valley in 30 generations. The Sicilian family who has no idea their surname is Albanian in origin. DNA doesn't lie about borders because DNA doesn't know what a border is. It only knows who had children with whom. And in that sense, this entire question, Albanians, Greeks, Sicilians, was never really about 3 separate peoples at all. It was about one long, shared, tangled Mediterranean family tree that politics later cut into pieces and gave separate names to. So who has the closest DNA to Albanians? By the deepest, oldest shared ancestry, the science currently points to the Greeks. By living, breathing, genetically striking exceptions hiding inside modern Italy, it's the Sicilians of the Arbëreshë villages. And by broad cultural and colonial overlap, stretching back to Magna Graecia, southern Italy sits quietly in between both. But maybe the real answer isn't a name at all. Maybe it's a reminder that every nation's story of purity, we are the untouched original people, is usually a story, not a genome. Every population on Earth is a crowd of refugees, conquerors, traders, and lovers who happened to stay long enough to build a flag. So here's my real question for you, and I want you to answer it in the comments before you close this tab. When you found out your own ancestry wasn't as pure or as simple as you were taught, did it make you feel less like yourself or more connected to the whole human story? Tell me below. And if this pulled back a curtain you didn't expect, subscribe, because next week we're going even 10 minutes further back to the DNA that connects the entire Balkans to a single Bronze Age collapse nobody saw coming.